Hey folks, welcome to another episode of the Security Table, where before we hit record, we were debating Asimov's 3 laws of robotics and how they apply to AI. Bet you really wanted to be there for that conversation, but it was actually really quick. As always, happy to be joined by Matt Coles and Izar Tarandosh.
Cheers.
And
we're all caffeinated.
Yeah, you're getting Izar at maximum caffeination right now, which is a good place for him to be because he just tends to fly off the handle even more, which is good. All right, so Matt, what are we talking about? Something about threat intelligence. I don't know that I totally understand what we're talking about. So set the table for us.
All right, I'm going to ask a simple question, and you guys are going to go, right? Discuss. Threat modeling or threat intelligence. Are they the same?
No, next.
All right, we're done. That's okay. We can go home.
I'll argue yes.
Mic drop. Gotta go.
I'll say yes just to make this an interesting episode. Yes, they are the same.
No, but there's the thing. I don't think that people are saying that they're the same thing, but for some strange reason that I simply can't fathom, they're saying that one is superseding the other.
Okay, we're talking about this article was written in Doc Reading about practices around threat modeling, but it heavily relies on using threat intelligence as a means of identifying and managing threats. And I think we want to argue here, or I want to argue, that threat modeling has a different purpose than threat intelligence, and threat intelligence should be the consumer of threat modeling, not the other way around.
So when you say threat intelligence, let's work up a definition of that, because I feel like we've talked about threat modeling about 784 times on the security table.
There's only a few books and a manifesto and a conference dedicated to this and a podcast that's dedicated.
And that manifesto does have a definition that we all agreed on: analyzing representations of a system to, I can't remember the last part, to, I always say to
identify privacy and security threats.
Yeah, I always add to find because I can never remember what word we use to connect it, but to identify security and privacy problems.
Concerns.
Yeah.
Wait, that just blew my mind. Okay, yeah. Go.
Well, we'll come back to that. But like, when we say threat intelligence, Matt, like, what is that? What's your definition of threat intelligence?
Well, I don't know if it's my definition, but my understanding of threat intelligence is, if you run a service or you're managing a system, or I mean, I guess product companies would have this as well. I think it's traditionally cybersecurity, where you're looking at all of the incoming attacks, because of course every company is getting flooded with attacks, right? Whether they're scripted or not, and you're really looking at who from an attacker is doing what. Those attacks, and what's their goal against the services that you run, right? So, of course, MITRE ATT&CK framework is a taxonomy and a dictionary. Well, not dictionary. What's the word I want to look for? Some collection of attackers and their behaviors and their techniques that they use. And so, threat intel goes from that understanding who's going to come attack me to what are the active I'm going to use the word active threats against my system, and by who?
So just to bring that to one, of course, like many things in this field comes from the military. The definition of intelligence in the military sense, not the other sense, is that it's a military discipline that uses information collection and analysis approaches to provide guidance and direction to assist in strategy and tactical definition. Right, so it's people who are looking outside, people who are looking at what exists, what they can predict based on what they exist, with good assumptions, and then come and say, this is what we believe is going to happen at a certain probability.
You know what that sounds like? Threat modeling. What
That's
you just
the
said.
thing. That's the mistake. No, it does not.
It does awfully.
It does not.
Thinking about what could basically go wrong is what I summarize what you just said.
There's
looking to the
difference.
outside world to consider what could possibly go wrong. That's what I heard you say.
Oh my
No,
God, I think I just had
there's a basic difference here, and that's why Matt blew my mind with what he opened up with.
Okay.
If we look at the pipeline, of information, in my opinion, in my experience, threat intelligence sets up the ducks. These are all the possible ducks, all the ducks that are coming our way with high probability that they are going to land. Threat modeling puts those ducks in a row by saying, this duck is more possible than this duck, and if this duck happens, this is how we're going to shoot it down.
So they go hand in hand, is what you're saying.
They go in a pipeline.
Okay.
They go in a pipeline. From all the sources that we use to elicit threats in threat modeling, threat intel is a very important one. Now, threat intel also suffers, again, in my opinion, my experience, I could be wrong, probably am. Threat intel also suffers from the generic issue of all forms of intelligence. It all depends on how you collect your data. It all depends on who interprets your data. It's fueled by biases and opinions. So I would say that it's a subset of the incoming data that should serve your threat model. It's not the totality.
So let me ask you a question there. So I hear what you're saying, and I think I understand this. So if you were doing threat modeling and you use, say, MITRE ATT&CK as the source of what could possibly go wrong versus threat intelligence is what's going wrong today. Is that a good way of, like, there's the
threat
theoretical
intel is a subset. Threat intel is a subset of what might happen, informed by what we see happening outside, right?
Kind of like,
that's across everybody, though, right? So it's not what's specifically happening in our environment. It's let's look at the macro conditions and macro environment as all possible things that could happen.
Yes and no, because once you go into the people who do this, I'm just talking from hearsay, I never did it myself. Talk about people who do this for a profession. They look into silos. They say, okay, these specific actors are targeting people in the finance sector, in the entertainment sector. So they're able to do some sort of subsetting yet filtering to say these are the threats that are more present in these verticals and sell that as targeted intelligence to those verticals. So you could go to one of these professional analysis people, threat intel people, and say, hey, I'm in this area. I'm interested in knowing what's prevalent in here and how and what. And
that's the service. That's the service, though, right? The general scope of threat intelligence is what's currently happening today, either against my system or my company or my industry or geopolitical, whatever, nation state actions. If somebody's cutting a undersea cable somewhere, my business is going to get impacted. So that's a threat I need to understand, right?
True, but the way that the reason that I conflate both is that, as you can imagine, you need so many resources, time, good people, content to be able to figure out that something is happening. Have good intelligence. Right? Having bad intelligence is worse than having no intelligence.
Because you make bad choices.
I would like to understand. I'd like you to reverse engineer this then and explain why threat intelligence is not threat modeling, according to the definition. Because I'm starting to get a little bit fuzzy in the middle here. Like I thought, I started this conversation. We're going to talk about this. I'm like, oh, this is easy. We're all just going to be like, yeah, threat intelligence is not threat modeling. But then you read that definition of intelligence, and I started thinking, wait a minute. That sounds kind of like what threat modeling is. Maybe not exactly, but it's kind of like it. So reverse engineer it for me.
Let me play with it for a second. You're sitting on top of the castle. You're looking outside. You think cloud of dust coming in the horizon. The fact that there is a cloud of dust coming in the horizon does not inform what's the size of the moat that you need, how deep it is, how many sharks you're going to put in there, what's the size of the drawing bridge. Do you need a drawing bridge? Do you need two? Are they in the right direction? So threat intel is going to tell you there's a cloud of dust coming your way. That could mean that there's a crusade coming the way of your castle. But it's not going to help you dimension how you're going to build that castle or how you're going to defend it or
So threat intelligence does not include mitigations.
an
Is that what you're
architecture.
saying?
Okay. Hold on. I think we're dancing around a couple of things here. So,
Probably.
but I understand. I understand both your points now, and I want to modify what I said earlier about threat intelligence as a consumer of threat modeling, but threat intelligence
what I wanted
informs
to
a threat informs a threat model. So we are relating, and because we see ideally that threat modeling is done during architecture and design, right? You do it upfront. What can possibly go wrong based on what I know as I'm building this thing or as I'm designing this thing? Threat intelligence is what could go wrong based on what I'm seeing in the real world now that I have a functioning system, right? Or
Fair.
most likely, right? That's
Yep.
because that's the silos that cybersecurity space have put those things into. The threat model informs threat intelligence. What am I going to look for? Threat intelligence informs a threat model.
No.
Why? Why no?
Because threat modeling, as you said, fixes the thing in time in some way. Okay, and we are not talking now about a system. I think that we are talking more about an organization, about the way that it defends itself as an organism. The threat model exists. The threat intel changes with the threats. So the threat intel might possibly see threats that did not exist at the time that the threat model was executed. Even though we keep talking about continuous threat modeling and all that good stuff, we know that not everybody does. So sometimes the threat model has been fixed in time for long enough. The threat intel will be able to inform it with something new that didn't exist when the threat model was in place, or that wasn't considered, or something that was too complicated, and all of a sudden, because of technology, it became very simple.
Right. So this is where Chris's idea is coming in. So, and again, why I say threat intelligence informs threat modeling, and threat modeling basically becomes a consumer of threat intelligence. So it's a bidirectional situation here. Threat modeling is based on the information you know, the architecture you're about to build, and the threats that architecture brings in from I'll be careful here, from an academic sense, right? You have a taxonomy of things that can possibly go wrong. And when you do threat intelligence, you're going to say, oh, well, I'm really finding these problems, so let's update the model, because now I've maybe found a new method of attack or a new entry point or whatever that I didn't realize was there. And in fact, if I design something and then it gets built, well, it may get built differently than how it was designed, and now I have new stuff to worry about. But I can also see that threat modeling would inform threat intelligence, and maybe this is limiting it too much. Well, I'm building a castle. I have a moat. I have a portcullis. I have a drawbridge. If the model doesn't say I have an escape tunnel, half a mile down the road that opens up into a village, I'm not going to look for threats against the village, although I should. And so the threat model could inform threat intelligence as terms of what you want to look for. So there may be a feedback loop here, but they're not the same. I think they're different in that threat modeling is actively looking at the system from a what can go wrong standpoint and identifying do mitigations need to occur. Threat intelligence is looking at what's coming at me right now or soon to come at me right now, and do I need to worry about it? Do I need to mount a defense? And Chris, you're on mute.
It's been a long time since I've done this, so I forgot how to work the system. Now, since you've both used the castle analogy, now it's my turn because it's only fair. I should get to use the castle too. But here's what I've been sitting here thinking about in regards to the castle and the dust blowing at me. Whether the threat originates from a taxonomy or in my head from a threat modeling perspective, or whether it originates because it's actually happening to somebody in my network or someone there.
Mm-hmm.
seems to me like it's the same thing. Why does it matter where if we're talking about eliminating threats in the system, like the ultimate goal of threat modeling is to identify what are the things that could go wrong so that we can apply mitigations to them. Threat intelligence is, if it's not the same thing, it's a really close cousin. It's just a different source. And I did a little bit of research while we were talking here, and threat intelligence does often have recommended controls or configuration changes. So it does have a mitigations component to it. So it's not separate from mitigations.
Although
so I then throw back onto the table
defense.
and say, this is more similar than it is different.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
I'm starting to
those
agree with that.
mitigations, they are attached to the attack, not to the system.
They're not foundational mitigations. When we do threat modeling, we would do foundational mitigations, add a moat, not go out and figure out is that an approaching army or not.
Those mitigations that come from threat intelligence, they are more, this is the kind of threats, these are the things that we have on the drawer.
I mean,
to
the
react to this kind of
example
threats.
the example ChatGPT gave me is recommended controls or configuration changes, advice like disable Office macros by default, restrict PowerShell execution, or enforce MFA on remote access portals.
Yeah,
the
that
big
sounds
thing-
like
the big
ChatGPT
difference-
telling you something that you wanted to hear.
The big difference.
No, this
here
is in a bigger context. I
Yeah.
just asked it how does threat intelligence include ways to fix the problems?
Yeah. So I think I think what you're highlighting is in threat modeling, and I was just talking about this. When we do threat modeling, traditionally threat modeling, we're going to look at architectural, fundamental, by design mitigations, right? If we have insecure communications, we're going to enable security. With threat intelligence, when you identify what can go wrong, you can only mount a runtime defense, right? Either you're going to be proactive about reaching out to the attack and trying to figure out either its characteristics or to stop it there, or you're going to add a layer of, you're going to add, spikes in front of the drawbridge to slow down the incoming army. You can only mount runtime defense. Whereas threat modeling traditionally, you can only mount an architectural defense, but you can inform runtime defense.
I don't know that I agree with that, because the example that my best friend ChatGPT gave me about enforce MFA on remote access portals, though.
Will you choose a different model? Like choose Claude or something?
No, this is my friend, because it helps
We take
me.
no sides.
And
We
I
are
talk
not
to it.
biased.
But
no product.
I mean,
no
but
product,
if
advertisements here.
If enforce MFA on remote access portals is a mitigation to some threat intelligence thing, that's an architectural play. That's not a runtime defense.
No, that's a desperate. If you haven't yet done that, and you're waiting for threat intel to tell you, oh, by the way, perhaps you should.
True.
Then you got a problem. So it's what
So that's really the important part. Threat modeling is proactive. Threat intelligence is reactive.
There you go.
Okay.
And funny thing, it's reactive not to the attack happening. It's reactive to the attack going to happen.
Yep.
So in terms of time travel, it's will have reacting.
I'm gonna draw an analogy here, because this is something else that's come up recently, and I'm gonna take this. I don't want to take us in a new direction, but I just want to throw it out there. The debate between CVSS and EPSS.
I don't know. I'm still working on OPSS.
The CVSS is, vulnerability scoring. What's the potential for damage? EPSS is what's the potential for attack of that, exploitation of that vulnerability. Debate raging about how they inform risk, and what action companies should take. Well, the same thing with threat modeling, right? So threat modeling is going to come up with a bunch of stuff that you need to address. Threat intelligence is more real time. It's more reactive, but it's more from a defender standpoint. I can see that attack coming, whereas in threat modeling, it's theoretical.
Could be theoretical completely.
Hot
and
take?
never.
Hot take.
Yeah.
Go for it.
EPSS is a threat intel on the cheap.
I wouldn't say on the cheap. It uses complex algorithms to figure.
But I'm not paying for it.
Sure. There are public sources of threat intelligence. You can gather your own information. And,
Definitely.
I mean, that's
Sure.
what isn't that what like Shodan is and things like that, where you can go and
Yeah, you have
look.
to work a bit harder for that, but yeah.
I'm sure people don't try to put bad data in those sources either
Yeah.
to mess with you.
But I do, and that's a totally real thing. Like
Yeah.
if you want
So-
people to not look that way, you make them look that way.
So I agree with you, Chris. They are different, but they are not that different.
Yeah, I started this conversation with the what had been my classic answer to this, and that you're just wrong. They're completely different. And this is the more we've gotten into it, the more it's like these are like really close cousins
Yeah,
of
I
each
still
other.
think that it's a pipeline.
They definitely are distinct things, but their purpose is ultimately to secure a system. One does it a little bit more upfront, proactively. One does it a little bit more at the back end, reactively, and they can inform each other. Data can go in both directions.
Yeah, it's like static and runtime, basically.
Yeah, but I still think that the threat intel informing the threat model is a more dynamic and useful thing than the threat model informing the threat intel. Because the threat intel, by definition, has to have a broad scope of the things that it looks like. By using
Yeah.
the threat model to inform it, hey, these are the things that we are not so certain that we did right, so perhaps you should look at it. You are scoping that thing and be too
Only
much,
if you-
and perhaps
only if
blinding it to
you-
other things.
Only if you artificially limit it that way. I mean, if you don't know what information you don't need from like, we don't have PHI in our system. I don't need to worry about healthcare threats, right, in my threat intel feed. Why? I mean,
Yeah.
you can use it to filter information and maybe target the things that we made assumptions about. But that doesn't mean you don't
But
look
your-
at anything else in your threat intelligence.
Your
It just
threat
means
model
you're-
informs threat intelligence because it's the best place you have a representation of what the system is. Like in threat intelligence by itself, how do you know what the system actually is? Configuration files or
You can't,
network
and you can't
scans
possibly
or-
look at all the threat intel that all that possibly exists and understand how it impacts you without the threat model. That doesn't mean artificially limit things. Well, I mean, it may, but it shouldn't. Okay, so where'd we land?
So I think we got a definition. At the 22-minute mark, we've come up with a working definition, but we've ignored the article that got us to this
I think
conversation.
that we didn't come to the definition. I think that we came to a working situation.
Well, so the article is threat modeling is useless and threat intelligence is the way. And I think we've just I think we just contradicted that. Not contradicted, but refuted that.
I find that, okay, and this is going to come from a loving place because I just spoke a lot about threat intel without ever doing it. I find that a lot of people who do threat intel and say that have never done a threat model.
Yeah, I think that's true.
That's first.
You know, there definitely is this. You see across the cybersecurity landscape, you do see this a lot, right? There's people in the runtime defense camp who are unfamiliar with development practices, and there are people in the development camp who are very unfamiliar with runtime practices. At some point, you kind of need to know both in order to be effective.
You are this close to talking about DevSecOps. I'm just alerting you.
I'm not. I'm absolutely not. I'm absolutely not talking that.
Throw a
But
quarter in the jar.
There's the understanding, and then there's the bad implementation of that.
I'm reading this article
good thing.
again. I'm reading this article again, and I think it suffers from a common problem that we've seen across threat modeling for the last 5 or so years, and that
It was
is
written by ChatGPT.
no, because that ChatGPT is my friend. I already said that. I would have been complimentary if it was ChatGPT. It's people continue to try to define threat modeling for their own purposes. And not they don't use like the manifesto definition that we all agreed on and fought over and whatnot and got to a good place with.
Oh.
And then the more I'm reading this a second time, and I'm like, all they're doing is they're trying to use threat modeling as a synonym to threat intelligence just because it
fits their
works as a
model.
word, not because they're trying to make a stand or make an argument that threat modeling and threat intelligence are the same.
I think that threat modeling suffers from the Humpty Dumpty phenomenon more than other things, where people just like impart the meaning to the word that they wanted to have,
Yeah.
rather than what agreed to be.
And I've seen that in the threat modeling kind of vendor startup space where some people are using the term threat modeling, and it's like, that's not threat modeling according to the definition of what the manifesto calls threat modeling. Like, you can just take, I mean, I guess I can take any two words and put them together and say that I do runtime security. What does that mean? Well, I'm redefining what runtime security is. Like, it doesn't mean anything if you just take it and try to twist it to fit your strategy or and I've seen that a couple of different times where people are like, well, we're doing threat modeling. And I'm like, well, not according to the threat modeling manifesto, you're not, because that's not threat modeling. And there's nobody else has really put out a definition. There's no competing definition.
Where's your model and where are your threats? I mean, it's kind of baked into the name.
Yeah.
You model the model, you elicit the threats.
This is like turning into like, it's like Seinfeld, it describes threat modeling.
You know how to get the threats, but you don't know how to model them.
And if we use those words explicitly, you model a system, you identify threats, you have intelligence about a system to identify threats.
Yeah, I like that.
But you got so many. You got so many words in between. It confuses me. Too many words. Two of them are the same thing. That means that at least half of it is the same thing.
Yes, I could.
Are you in management? Are you in management now? What just happened?
He's a.
I can get away with that because I don't ever have to have a job again in my life, so I could get away with saying that. That was me. Let the record show. That was my comment. That was the voice of Chris you heard there.
That was Chris's fault.
And in beige.
A lot of pointy-haired people out there were like, "Wait, what?"
Draw matrix for me, but make it circle.
Yeah, and again, put it in a PowerPoint, and
in no more than 16 colors,
and explain it to me like I'm 5. That's actually a true management principle. I've used it before. I'm like, you don't need to explain that to me like I'm in 2nd grade because I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know. All right, we could talk at length about executive reporting and executive.
We're gonna slide to a new topic. Hey, it's Monday morning. Let's not talk about management.
So did we come to some realization? Did we have a conclusion? Like, where are we landing on this?
I think we've decided the article. I was going to say full of something, but it's
okay. Let's see if we can agree on this. So we got 2 working definitions for each one, for threat intel and for threat model. Fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We do agree that they do have a relationship.
Yep.
We do agree that relationship is not one is dead and the other took over.
Yes.
We do agree that there is value in them working together.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so let's go embrace somebody who works at the SOC and everybody's happy.
We're going to sing Kumbaya, or what's going to happen?
So wait, you want developers to go talk to the SOC people?
No. I said we, the 3 of us.
Not even the security. We're not recommending security.
You want the SOC people to show up at the developer's desk? Can you imagine the pandemonium that would have?
No, you do not put the elephant and the hypo together. No.
Well, you know what? We're at the 30-minute mark. I think this is a good time to wrap up this conversation, and we have made the world a slightly better place today. So, once again, thank you for tuning in to the Security Table. For Matt, for Izar, I'm Chris, and we'll see you next time around.